Madeline Hayes almost walked past him. That is the part she would never be able to forget. Not the rain. Not the cold. Not even the sound, which was so small against the November night that it barely registered as something real. What she would carry for the rest of her life was those 3 steps she took after she heard it. 3 steps in the wrong direction. Then something made her stop. She was 27 years old and had been on her feet since 5 that morning. She cleaned offices before dawn, worked the lunch shift at a diner on Caldwell Street, and spent her evenings restocking a pharmacy 2 blocks from the apartment she could barely afford. She was not a woman with extra to give. She was a woman who had learned to calculate exactly how much she had and distribute it carefully, because the margin between staying afloat and going under was smaller than most people wanted to believe. She stood in the rain on a Thursday night in November and told herself she had imagined the sound. Then it came again. She followed it to a storm drain half-choked with wet leaves, where the water pooled before finding its way underground. The blanket was grey and soaked through. The baby inside it was days old at most, and his cry by then was barely a cry at all. It was the sound of something small and furious fighting a battle it was already losing. Madeline picked him up before she made a single conscious decision. She pressed him against her coat and ran toward the hospital 4 blocks north, and she did not stop running until she handed him to the nurse at the intake desk, and the nurse's face did what faces do when they understand exactly what they are looking at. The doctors told her later that another 40 minutes in those conditions would have changed the outcome entirely. They did not spell out what that meant. They did not need to. Madeline sat in the waiting room in wet clothes and stared at the wall and tried to understand what had just happened to her life. The police came. They filed their reports. They made their calls and posted their notices, and the machinery of official inquiry ran its course over the weeks that followed, while the baby in the hospital grew stronger, ounce by ounce, in the particular determined way of babies who have survived something before they were old enough to know what surviving meant. No one came forward. No family. No tip. No tearful voice on the other end of a phone line claiming a terrible mistake. Nothing. As if the boy had arrived from the rain and the dark with no origin, no thread connecting him to any life that had come before. Madeline visited him every day. She told herself she was just checking in. Being responsible. Following up on something she had been part of. She sat beside his incubator and watched him breathe, and the days became weeks, and something happened in that visiting room that she did not immediately recognize for what it was. She had already decided. She just had not said it out loud yet. The social worker's expression when Madeline made the call was the specific expression of a professional who had been trained to mask skepticism but had not entirely mastered it. Single. 27. 3 jobs. Studio apartment on the east side with a heating unit that worked when the weather cooperated. Madeline was not unaware of how it looked. She said the same thing to every person who raised an eyebrow, every family member who expressed concern, every coworker who asked if she had really thought this through. She said, "I know what I am doing." And when they pressed, she said it again. Not louder. Just with more certainty. It took 8 months to finalize. 8 months of paperwork and home visits and forms that asked her to justify herself in language that never quite fit the actual thing she was doing, which was simpler and larger than any form could hold. On the day she signed the last document, she drove to the foster placement, buckled a car seat into the back of a vehicle with 200,000 miles on it, and drove home. She named him Graham. Graham Pierce Hayes, because he needed a full name and she was his mother now, and she gave him the name the way she gave him everything else. Completely. Without holding any of it back. She had no idea what she was building. She only knew she had chosen it. What Madeline did not know, could not know, was the shape of the story on the other side of that storm drain. The story that did not begin in the rain but 3 years earlier, in a hotel bar in the financial district, where a woman named Nicole Stone sat across from a man named Preston Wolfe and decided, with the particular clarity of someone who had spent a long time calculating odds, that he was the best bet she was ever going to get. Preston Wolfe was 53 and had been accumulating wealth for long enough that it had stopped being the point. It was simply the context. The air in every room he occupied. He had been married once, which he considered sufficient data, and his position on children had been stated so often and so consistently that it had achieved the status of policy. No. Not negotiable. Not revisable under any circumstances. Nicole was 26 and understood negotiation. She also understood that some things could not be negotiated around. When she found out she was pregnant for months into the relationship, she understood this immediately. Preston had been clear. She had been listening. She knew exactly what. The information in her hands meant for the arrangement she had worked very carefully to construct. She did not tell him. She told herself she was protecting herself, which was one way to describe what she was doing. She told herself the child would be fine, that someone would find him, that the world had systems for exactly this kind of thing. She told herself these things because the alternative was not something she intended to sit with. She chose a night when it was raining because rain covered sound. She did not look back as she walked away. She did not think about what she had left in the gutter because thinking about it would have required her to understand what it was. She had made her calculation. She had executed it. She folded it away with the same efficiency she applied to everything that threatened the life she had built. For 6 years, the arrangement held. Preston bought her things. She traveled in his orbit. She appeared in the right photographs with the right expression and understood that this was the job and she was skilled at it. She had always been skilled at performing stability for an audience that wanted to believe in it. Then the audit happened. It was not Nicole's fault, which was the particular cruelty of that season. A financial structure from one of Preston's earlier companies had drawn regulatory attention. And regulatory attention drew journalists. And journalists, when they pull threads, tend to find all manner of things that wealthy men would have preferred left undiscovered. Including the women in their lives. Her background, examined in print, was not what the story required. 3 separate profiles ran in 2 weeks. Old acquaintances with long memories and no loyalty. Preston's legal team moved quickly, which meant Nicole received her transition documents before she had fully understood she was being transitioned out. The settlement was not what she had expected. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment. She assessed her options. She found them considerably more limited than she was accustomed to finding them. It was on a Thursday morning, 18 months after everything collapsed, that she opened her phone and saw the article. Business publication. Technology sector. She was scrolling past it when the photograph stopped her. She held the phone with both hands. A young man named Graham Pierce. CEO of a technology company valued at $900 million at last assessment. 24 years old. The article used words like visionary and relentless and quietly unstoppable. It mentioned, in the way that profiles of self-made people always mention it, that he had been adopted as an infant by a single mother named Madeline Hayes. That he had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city. That his first company had failed at 21. That his second company, started with a loan his mother had taken against her own pension, had not failed. Nicole read the part about the pension twice. She set the phone down. She picked it up again. She did not immediately name what she was feeling. She organized it into something more manageable. Maternal instinct. The appropriate response of a woman who had been young and frightened and had wondered, as any human being would, what had become of the child she had never meant to permanently abandon. She began making inquiries. She was careful and patient and thorough, and at the end of 3 weeks she had what she needed. A name. An address. A plan she described to herself as reconnection, because that word had considerably better weight than the alternative she was choosing not to look at directly. She did not think about Madeline Hayes very much during this planning. That was the first mistake. The second was believing that Graham Pierce was the same kind of person as the men she had spent her adult life managing. He was not. The letter arrived at his office on a Wednesday. His assistant, Alison Mercer, reviewed it with the practiced instinct of someone who had worked for Graham long enough to know which things required his immediate attention. This one did. Not because of its careful wording. Because of the specific claim at its center. Graham read it twice. Then he called Madeline. She was at the pharmacy. She was always somewhere practical when he called, which was something about her that had never changed in 24 years. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the letter. About the claim. About what his legal team had spent for days attempting to disprove and had found, as they carefully phrased it, consistent with available records. Madeline listened to all of it without interrupting once. When he finished she said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," he said. "I'm asking you. You're asking me because you want permission. You don't need permission from me. What do you want?" He thought about it honestly because she had always required him to think about things honestly. "I want to understand," he said. "I want to look at her and understand what happened." "Okay," Madeline said. "Are you okay with that?" She took a moment. Not because she did not know the answer but because she was choosing to give him the real one rather than the easy one. You being okay is what I care about, she said. My feelings about this are mine to manage. Mom. Both things can be true at the same time. That is not the same as choosing one over the other. He was quiet for a moment. I love you, he said. I know. Call me after. She heard the faint sound of him exhaling slowly before the call ended. She sat in the supply room on an overturned crate for another 6 minutes. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and cardboard. Through the wall she could hear the soft familiar sounds of the pharmacy going about its afternoon. She thought about a rainy Thursday and 3 steps in the wrong direction. She thought about a pension she had not touched until the moment she needed to. She thought about Graham at 11, coming home with a letter about the advanced program at the new school, sitting at the kitchen table with an expression that was trying very hard not to be too excited, in case she was tired, in case it was too much, in case he was asking for something he shouldn't. She thought about what she had told him then. That she had never once, not in any single moment across all those years, found him to be too much. Then she stood up and went back to work. Nicole Stone arrived at the restaurant Allison had selected for the first meeting 7 minutes early and spent those 7 minutes composing herself in the way she was very good at composing herself. She had dressed with precision. She had prepared her opening carefully. She had mapped likely responses and built a path through each one. Graham was already seated. This disrupted her in ways she had not anticipated. She had planned an entrance. He had quietly removed that option, possibly without knowing it, which somehow made it worse. She crossed the room and sat down and looked at him properly for the first time. He was watching her with an expression she could not decode quickly enough. She gave him the version she had prepared. She spoke about being young and afraid. About Preston's ultimatum, which she had decided in her own private accounting to characterize as more absolute and less ambiguous than it had actually been, because the real version, in which she had weighed 2 options with a kind of calm she was not proud of in retrospect, was not what this meeting required. She described a woman alone and pressured and facing something unsurvivable. She did not describe a woman who had opened a business publication on a Thursday morning and done some arithmetic. Graham listened to all of it without moving. When she finished he said, I would like you to meet my mother. Nicole held her expression steady. Your mother? Madeline Hayes. I want you to be in the same room before I decide anything else about what this is or what it becomes. Nicole recognized that she had no good response to this except agreement. She agreed. Madeline arrived at Graham's house 12 minutes early because she was always early and she saw no reason to change that now of all times. She wore the navy blazer she kept for occasions that required one and carried herself the way she always carried herself, without particular performance in any direction. Graham's housekeeper offered tea and she accepted, because she had been raised to accept hospitality offered sincerely. She was sitting in the living room with the tea in her hands when Nicole arrived. They looked at each other across the room. Madeline looked at a woman who had driven away from a storm drain in November. Nicole looked at a woman who had run toward one. Graham sat between them in the careful neutrality of a man who had decided to let the room tell him what he needed to know. Nicole began the version she had been refining since the first meeting. She spoke about gratitude. About how fortunate Graham had been to find someone like Madeline. About how she had never stopped wondering, never stopped hoping that he had found safety and love. Can I ask you something? Madeline said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply direct, in the way of someone who had raised a child alone for 24 years and understood that directness saved everyone a great deal of time. Nicole paused. Of course. Not about the reasons. I heard the reasons through Graham. Madeline set her tea down carefully. I want to ask about the specific night. November. 6 degrees that evening, I still remember it clearly. He was wrapped in a blanket that had absorbed so much water it had stopped functioning as a blanket. The doctors told me that another 40 minutes in those conditions would have meant a very different conversation. Not about choices or second chances. About a very small coffin. The room went completely still. I am not saying this to hurt you, Madeline continued. I am saying it because I need to understand whether you have actually sat with what that night was. Not abstractly. Specifically. Whether you have genuinely understood what 40 minutes means when applied to a newborn in a flooded gutter in November. Nicole was very still. I have carried that, she said. And her voice was different now. Something had shifted inside it. Something unplanned. Then tell me what you have been carrying, Madeline said quietly. Because I need to understand whether you are here because you have truly been living with what you did. or whether you opened a business publication on a Thursday morning and did some arithmetic. The silence that followed was the longest silence the room had ever held. Nicole looked at the woman across from her. At the navy blazer and the steady hands and the eyes that did not need to perform anything because they had already done everything that needed doing. Something cracked. Not dramatically. Not with tears, though those would come later, in private, with a force that surprised her. Something quieter cracked. The architecture of the story she had been living inside. Both, Nicole said. The word sat in the room like something physical. Both, she said again, lower. It is both. I have carried it. And I saw the article. And I cannot honestly separate which one brought me here. Madeline looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. Slowly. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just the acknowledgement of someone who had finally heard something true. Okay, she said. That is somewhere to start. The months that followed did not resolve into anything clean. Nicole did not disappear. Graham had meant what he said about not being a closed door, and he extended the same deliberate patience to what followed. She came to one dinner and then a second. She answered his questions honestly when he asked them, and he asked many, because understanding was what he had wanted, and understanding required honesty from everyone in the room, including honesty about the parts of Nicole's story that were not favorable to her. She told him the version that was true rather than the version she had constructed. She told him that the pressure from Preston had been real but not as absolute as she had described. That she had weighed two options with a calm she was not proud of. That she had spent 6 years not thinking about what she had left in that gutter because thinking about it required understanding what it was, and she had not been ready for that understanding until the world removed every comfortable distance she had placed between herself and it. Graham listened to all of it. He did not give her the anger she had expected and in some private way prepared herself for as a form of penance. He gave her something harder to absorb. Clarity. I do not hate you, he said. I am not carrying something I need you to take back. But I need you to understand the shape of what you are asking for. I know, she said. Do you? He was not unkind. He was exact. My mother worked 3 jobs when I was small. She took a loan against her own pension to give me a second chance after my first company failed. She drives a 12-year-old car that she will not allow me to replace because she says it has never given her a reason to stop trusting it. He paused. She has given me 24 years of reasons to trust her. Small ones and large ones. You are starting from 0. 0 is fine. 0 is honest. But it is where you are starting from. What does starting from 0 look like? Nicole asked. It looks like exactly what has been happening. Slowly. Honestly. Without expecting acceleration. She nodded. And without attempting to renegotiate the terms when the slowness becomes uncomfortable, he added. She nodded again. What Nicole had not prepared for, and what no version of her plan had accounted for, was the evening 3 months in when she arrived at Graham's house and found Madeline already in the kitchen. Not helping the way a guest helps. The way a mother helps. Moving through the space without self-consciousness. Completely at home in a room that was not technically hers but had become hers in the way that 24 years of choosing someone creates a belonging that no square footage can revoke. Graham was laughing at something she was telling him. Not the laugh he used in meetings or press photographs or any public setting. The real one. The completely unguarded one. The laugh of a man who had been made comfortable by years of exactly this and nothing else. Nicole stood in the doorway and watched. Something happened in her that she had not expected and had not prepared a response for. Not jealousy. Something closer to grief. The specific grief of understanding, too late and too completely, exactly what she had walked away from. Not the company. Not the money or the photographs in the business publications. Not any of the things she had calculated. The laugh. The kitchen and the story and the way he turned automatically toward that woman when something delighted him. The reflex of 24 years built one ordinary evening at a time in an East Side apartment that had never quite had enough heat. Madeline noticed her in the doorway. Come in, she said simply. The pasta is almost done. Nicole came in. The months continued. The awkward honesty became something that still had no name but was real in the way it was built, one question at a time and one answered truth at a time, and the slow accumulation of showing up without expecting anything in return. There came a morning in spring when Graham drove to the East Side and parked in front of the building he had grown up in. He sat with the window down. The building looked the same. Slightly smaller than memory, the way things from childhood always appear slightly smaller when you return to them from the other side of time. The fire escape on the third floor still listed slightly to the left. The buzzer panel still had the label for 3B missing because it had come off when Graham was 9 and the landlord had never thought it worth replacing. He thought about the boy who had grown up behind those walls. Who had learned to read at the kitchen table because Madeline had sat across from him every night with a book of her own, not making it a lesson, just making it the thing they did. Who had learned that work was not something you did because reward was guaranteed but because it was the way you moved through the world with your head up. Who had learned, most importantly, that being chosen was not something that happened once and then finished. It happened daily. And the daily choosing was the thing that made you certain of your own worth in a way that nothing else could replicate. He drove back across the city. He called Madeline from the driveway. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did. "Just wanted to hear your voice," he said. A pause. "Then, you are getting sentimental again." "Probably," he said. "Are you okay?" "Yes. I am really okay." "Good. That is what matters." He sat in the car for another minute after they hung up, thinking about 3 steps in the wrong direction on a Thursday night in November, and the moment something makes you stop when everything in you wants to keep walking. Some people walk past. Some people stop. Madeline Hayes had stopped. And Graham Pierce Hayes had spent 24 years learning in the way you learn things that enter your bones rather than just your head what that moment had been. What kind of person it required. What kind of love it was. What it cost and why she had never once described it as a cost. He went inside. He made himself dinner in a kitchen that was warm and quiet and entirely his. Later that same week, Alison Mercer came into his office carrying a folder and wearing the expression she used when she was working very hard to remain professionally neutral about something she was not professionally neutral about in any way. He looked up from his desk. She set the folder in front of him without speaking. He opened it. On the first page, in plain clean letters at the top of the document, was the name. The Madeline Hayes Foundation. He had not told her. He had asked Alison to keep the paperwork sealed until everything was finalized, and Alison, who was exceptional at her job, had kept it sealed. The endowment was structured. The scholarship criteria were written. The 11 cities were selected. Everything was ready. He thought about the pension loan. He thought about the 3 jobs and the supply room crate and the 12-year-old car that had never given her a reason to stop trusting it. He thought about calling her right then to tell her what he had done. He decided not to. He wanted her to find out in the room. He wanted to see her face in the moment she understood what had been built in her name. Not because he needed her reaction. Because she had spent 24 years doing things without fanfare or announcement or any requirement that anyone witness them, and he thought it was time she was witnessed. Fully. In front of everyone who needed to see it. The event was held on a Friday evening in the atrium of the company's main building. 200 people. Investors and employees and journalists and board members and people who had spent for years watching Graham Pierce become something they had not seen coming and were still not entirely sure how to categorize. Madeline arrived in the navy blazer. She had not been told it was anything other than a company gathering he had wanted her to attend. She sat in the third row with Alison beside her and looked around the room with the calm curiosity of someone who was always more interested in other people than in herself. Nicole Stone was there too. In the back of the room. Quietly. Graham walked to the front and the room went still in the way that rooms go still when the person about to speak is someone everyone in it has a reason to listen to. He looked out at 200 people. He did not look at his notes. "People ask me how I built this company," he said. "They ask it in interviews and boardrooms and on podcasts where the host wants a clean origin story. Something with a beginning and a method and a lesson that fits neatly into a headline." He paused. "The truth is not clean." He let that sit. "The truth is that I built this company because a woman working 3 jobs in an East Side apartment looked at a little boy and decided that his possibilities were worth more than her limitations. She did not do it because she expected this room. She did not do it because anyone was watching. She did it because she heard something in the dark on a rainy Thursday night and she could not keep walking. The room was very still. She took a loan against her own pension when I needed a second chance after my first company failed. She drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and told me it had never given her a reason to stop trusting it. She sat on an overturned crate in a supply room at the back of a pharmacy to take my phone calls, because the crate was where she was and the call was more important than finding somewhere better to sit. He paused. His eyes found her in the third row. 24 years ago, he said, a woman heard a baby crying in a storm drain on a Thursday night in November. The room held its breath. Most people would have kept walking. He let those words sit in the silence until every person in that room had felt them. She didn't. Madeline had been composed through all of it. She had sat in the third row with her hands in her lap and her chin level, the way she had always carried herself through the large moments of her life, without requiring the world to see what they cost her. But at those two words, something moved across her face. Not a performance. Not anything she chose. Something that came from a place too deep and too honest to manage the way she managed everything else. Her eyes filled. She did not let them spill. That was not who she was and had never been who she was. But for one visible moment, in a room full of 200 people, the woman who had picked a child up from a gutter and spent 24 years choosing him every single day without asking anything in return allowed the weight of being finally, publicly, completely seen to reach her face. One moment. Then she was composed again. But the room had seen it. Everything good in my life, Graham continued, every risk I took that was worth taking, every morning I got up and chose to try again after the last thing failed, every time I believed the next thing was possible when every practical reason said it wasn't, that is not me. That is what she built. One evening at a time in an apartment that never quite had enough heat. One phone call answered on the second ring. One choice made without fanfare and without audience simply because I needed it and she had decided that what I needed was worth every cost she was never going to mention. He stopped. The Madeline Hayes Foundation, he said, will fund scholarships for children in the foster system across 11 cities. Named for the woman who proved that a single person deciding to stop can change the entire direction of a life. The applause began somewhere in the middle of the room and spread. Not the polite applause of obligation. The kind that starts in a genuine place and cannot be contained. Graham walked down from the front of the room and came to where she was sitting. He crouched down to her level, the way she had crouched to his when he was small and something needed to be said at the right height. She looked at him. I know you would have told me not to, he said quietly. I would have, she said. Her voice was steady again. Almost. That is why I did not tell you. She looked at him for a long moment in the way she had looked at him across 24 years of moments large and small and everything between. Then she put her hand against his face. The gesture of someone who has been a mother for a very long time and understands that some things are said through hands better than through any combination of words the language can offer. You did not have to do this, she said. I know, he said. Then why? He looked at her without looking away. Because you stopped, he said. When most people would have kept walking. And I needed the world to know that someone stopped. I needed every person in this room to understand what that means and who it was and what it cost and why it mattered. Because you never told them. You were never going to tell them. So I did. She held his gaze. Two people who had spent 24 years in the kind of conversation that does not always require words and had learned to hear each other in the spaces between them. Then Madeline Hayes said the thing she always said when Graham had done something that moved her beyond what language could adequately hold. She said, don't be up too late. And Graham Pierce Hayes laughed. The real one. The completely unguarded one. The one that started in the warmth of 24 years and had nowhere to go except outward, into a room full of 200 people who had come to see a business event and had instead witnessed something they would not easily forget. In the back of the room, Nicole Stone did not leave early. She sat with what she was watching and did not look away from it, which was perhaps the most honest thing she had done in a very long time. She watched the man she had left in a gutter stand in front of 200 people and name the woman who had run toward him. She watched a room full of strangers applaud a woman in a navy blazer who had spent 24 years doing what she did without needing applause from anyone. She sat with all of it. Then she left quietly when the room began to move. Outside, the spring city was doing what spring cities do. Indifferent and enormous and full of people moving through their Friday evenings toward wherever they were going next, carrying their own private calculations and their own private costs that nobody else in the world could fully see. Nicole stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she went home. Some things do not resolve into clean endings. Some things simply become the truest version of what they always were. A woman who stopped. A child who grew. A choice made in the dark on a Thursday night in November that turned out to be, as most real choices do, something that kept being made for the next 24 years. One morning at a time. One crate in a supply room at a time. One phone call answered on the second ring because it was more important than finding somewhere better to sit. 3 steps in the wrong direction. And then something made her stop. That is where the story begins. That is where it ends. That is where it has always been.